and welcome to episode 2 of the PowerScore LSAT podcast. This is Dave Kaloran coming to you from Napa Valley.
Yeah, and this is John Denning coming to you from down in Los Angeles, California.
John, how are things in LA?
Well, Dave, on a happy note, I can see the sunshine again after 2 or 3 days of rain, which was deeply alarming down here. It felt apocalyptic. How you doing up there?
Los Angeles driving cracks.
People lost their minds.
Right out of the gate.
2 days of rain and everyone lost their mind.
You know, it is cold in Napa, but a very cool thing happened last night. It actually kind of snowed a bit. It didn't really snow in the valley floor, but up in the mountains, it has snowed, and so all the peaks are snow dusted. And that is a really cool thing to see. It doesn't happen that often, so
awesome. Pretty
stoked about it in general. Let's start off with drinks, because that is my favorite thing to start off with, a little ice rattling. Tonight, I've got to go for episode 2. I've got to go with my second favorite drink of all time, which is, in fact, a rum and Coke. So
I'd make a crack about your unsophisticated palate, but it's a fantastic drink, so I'm not going to give you too hard a time.
There's nothing unsophisticated about it, and it's classic Bacardi rum, which is the way you have to have this drink. No dark rums or anything like that. It has to be straight up. You could substitute Diet Coke. I would be okay with that.
Fair enough.
And often do.
Yeah.
What are you drinking?
Believe it or not, speaking of unsophisticated, I've got a vodka on the rocks, and while that may seem a primitive choice, it'll make sense in just a second as we talk about the other theme of the evening.
Is that Tito's vodka, though?
It is Tito's vodka. It's a little nod to Austin.
What is the song of the night?
Yeah, well, I know you and I kicked around several, and frankly, several would have made a lot of sense for tonight's topic. But the one we landed on, and one of my favorites, is an old Queen tune from '91 called "The Show Must Go On."
Nice.
From one of their last albums called Innuendo, as it turns out. Yeah, I know we had flirted with a couple of other ones. I don't know if you want to make mention.
Many classic rock songs.
Indeed.
Partially because tonight's theme is classic. You know, retaking the LSAT, whether or not you should, so many questions about it. We really wanted to kind of go down that classic road. So this is a 2-part episode, really. And so not just tonight, but next week as well, it's going to be classic rock. And then we'll return to something that is, let's say, a little bit more modern, a little more current. But we did kick around a lot of different songs. And for example, I'll throw a few of them out. Aerosmith's Back in the Saddle. That was one of my early favorites. Foreigner's Double Vision, which I think is particularly appropriate from a retake standpoint. And a few others as well. The Doors, Love Me 2 Times. And so then there was another one, which we're actually saving for next week. But tell me a little bit about this song. This was more your choice
the one
than
not
mine.
being saved for next week that also made a late cut was a little bit of Britney. Britney Spears, Hit Me Baby One More Time.
I appreciate you mentioning that, since it was my suggestion. And you're
steal
literally
Britney
like, should I talk about Britney? Of course you should talk about Britney.
Unashamed to steal Britney from you.
You really should be.
The saddest part, and this is how old we are, is that might now also be classic rock.
Not to me.
Let me tell you a little bit of why Queen was the gold medalist here, and why this particular song is so, I think, poignant for tonight's topic. One of the I think hallmarks of people who succeed in the face of retaking this test is just gutsiness and grit and an inability to give up and quit. And few things define Freddie Mercury in his final days better than that particular characteristic. And I think few places is it as evident as it was on this song. The story goes, as told by Queen's guitarist Brian May, who wrote this song, that when they went to record this in 1990, that Freddie came into the studio apparently ready to go, but looking just haggard, frankly, absolutely worn down by the illness that would eventually take his life. And Brian May had a lot of doubts. In fact, sat him down and said, Fred, I don't think you can do this. I don't think you can record this song. It's going to be impossible for you to sing this, I think is the quote. And Freddie, in that kind of like classic stiff upper lip British character, sets his vodka down, which is where my drink comes from, and says, and I'll spare you the full quote, "I'll effing do it, darling." And went in and killed it. One take, and again, in Brian May's quote, lacerated the vocal. just destroyed it.
What a great description that is, though. Lacerated.
Lacerated the vocal.
I like that.
It's usually not the words you want to hear put together, but in Freddie's case, how apt. And so here we are with a classic song and a classic topic to talk about.
Very nice. Especially since our real goal here is to lacerate the LSAT, which I'll probably say that several times this week. I'm going to lacerate this.
That's a great word.
Kind of like what happened in the big game this weekend, where the Patriots lacerated the Rams, although...
Could you call it that?
They won, didn't they?
Yeah.
Six times now, man.
Did anybody win? Yeah.
Yes.
Brady's got 6. It's remarkable. But, man, what a snooze of a game.
It depends on your perspective. If you really like punting, God, that was one of the best games I've ever seen. That probably was the best punting Super Bowl of all time.
Punting spectacular. However, and again, I'm stealing straight from, I don't know, Twitter, Instagram, somewhere, but can you imagine paying $5,000 to watch 20 punts in Maroon 5?
No, fortunately, I didn't have to. But the funny thing about that is every time the playoffs come up in recent years, I have posted an article that I wrote several years back called Tom Brady and the LSAT. And because Tom Brady turns out to just be really the best NFL player of all time, I get to reuse this article repeatedly. But one of the things about it is that, in my heart, I'm not really a Patriots fan. I didn't grow up liking the Patriots. I don't have any special affinity for them as a team. But when I was writing this article, it kind of switched for me, honestly, just reading about his background. And it wasn't like his fashion choices or his wife choices or girlfriend choices or anything like that. He can pretty much do what he wants, obviously.
Pretty much above critique.
What are you saying? It's above average?
I'm saying Bridget Moynihan's a good start, and then what, Giselle?
I don't think they like each other that much. She was all over Edelman for MVP and not so much TB. Not that Brady deserved the MVP. Definitely not. Edelman or the punter was the MVP. Yeah. But I read a quote, actually, that he had said to Robert Kraft, the owner, and this was when he was a rookie, and it has stuck with me really the entire time because it is the epitome of self-confidence and self-belief in who you are. And whenever I see him play, I think about this. He's famously competitive, and I think that is a really important thing to have. You have to want to beat this test when you take it. And if you struggle the first time, it becomes a harder task because you feel like maybe you've been defeated just a little bit or you're struggling. But he happened to be at the rookie camp, I guess, the preseason camp in 2000. And so he's just been drafted. He was a 6th-round draft choice, and I think he was the 193rd player taken. So he didn't come out of college as a big star. He wasn't really widely wanted. But the Patriots took a flyer on him. A lot of times 6th-round draft choices don't make the team. And so he runs into the owner. Robert Kraft is there, and he walks up to him and he says, "Hi, we've never met, but I'm Tom Brady." And Kraft, who's a pretty involved owner, he's obviously see him at games all the time. He says, "I know who you are. You're the quarterback from Michigan, and we just drafted you. You're our 6th-round choice." So he knows who he is, at least by sight, and he kind of like gives him a little bit of recognition. And Brady doesn't say "Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. I hope I make the team," or "I'm here to help, doing what I can." That's not his response. And I've always found that interesting because that would have been a really natural response for the typical person. "Thanks so much. I appreciate it."
Yeah, gratitude. Try to ingratiate yourself, right?
Exactly. Thanking the people who have now, started giving you a paycheck for giving you a paycheck. Instead, Brady turns around and says to him, "Yeah, and I'm the best decision this organization has ever made." And I'm like, I don't think he stumbled over the word organization the way I kind of did, but I'm pretty sure that he probably just flipped that off. And then he turned around on his heel and in Tom Brady style probably just walked off into the sunset from camp. But think about the confidence that takes. You're nobody really at that point. Yeah, you're an NFL draftee, but overall, you haven't done anything, you haven't shown anybody anything, and yet you're telling them right then and there that it's the best decision they've ever made. And I think now, when you go back in time, it'd be very easy to say, yeah, that was, without question, the best decision they made.
But imagine the self-belief he didn't have a movie star or supermodel girlfriend at home at that point. He didn't have he had nothing.
You don't know. I mean,
I don't know what he had at home. Come on,
man.
But he certainly wasn't Tom Brady, the NFL's, let's just say it as it is now, the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
He was a 6th-round draft pick, and yet he had enough self-belief that he was going to describe himself to the owner, the guy who held his fate in his hands, as I'm the best thing to ever happen to you.
I love that. And I think that actually speaks a lot going into the discussion that we have tonight, which is no matter why you're retaking the test or all the things you do, to prepare for it, the key thing here is you got to believe.
Yeah.
You have to think that you can do it. You have to know inside that you have the capacity to make it happen in order to actually achieve that. And because of that and that quote and just watching him over the years, I've really become kind of a big fan of his on a football level. Not that I love the Patriots, but it's just like that Atlanta game a couple of years ago. You knew they were coming back.
Yeah.
So, and it's also turned out financially good for me because I now never bet against them in the playoffs.
We have made some propitious Patriots bets. You and I both.
Yes, and probably one of the best football games I ever saw was that Atlanta-New England game. I saw it in Vegas, which made it so much sweeter because the Atlanta fans were over the moon about their big victory. And I'm like, guys, we're not at the end of the game, and I know who's on the other sideline.
Yeah, I was passing a bottle of tequila around with a bunch of guys who'd also bet on the Patriots because I don't remember the end of that game. But we did end up all winning, and it worked out.
Either way, we'll post the link to that article. It's called Tom Brady and the LSAT in the podcast
It's one of my favorites you've ever
description.
written. Yeah, one of my favorites you've ever written.
Let's move on and talk a little bit about the week in the LSAT world.
Okay.
John, what's been going on? What's coming up?
Well, happily, this will be quick because there hasn't been much in terms of LSAT updates. The biggest thing, I suppose, at this point is just people have a few things to look forward to, and this is relevant to what we'll discuss tonight. We're talking about retaking the LSAT tonight, and one of the things that certainly is going to dictate that decision is going to be if you took the January LSAT, how your results shake out. And you will know that as a post-Valentine's treat next Friday morning, February 15th, I believe is when those scores are set to release.
Probably about 9 a.m.
Yeah, that has been tradition.
Eastern
time, right. And you've got about 5 days after that to register for the March test if you do indeed decide to follow what I think is going to be our fairly unanimous advice tonight, which is probably retake if you're wondering. Not to spoil it. But March test
mystery.
Deadline is February 20th, so you've got a few days to consider your results and consider what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, and just as a side note, finally they give people a little bit of time to make a decision after getting their scores back. That's not always the case, and especially last year and the past couple of years, there's been some overlap with, they've given refunds and all sorts of weird stuff that's annoying. So we'll have some time to talk about that. But let's move on to the main topic tonight, which is indeed retaking the LSAT. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to break this into two parts. Tonight, we're really going to talk about the decision to retake and the pros and cons of it. And next week, we're really going to talk about how to organize the retake, how to study for it, what to do to actually improve your score and to get better at this test while you were kind of going through things. So these two pieces go hand in hand. And there are really 5 different reasons that we've come up with where you would sit down and say, this is why we would retake this test. So we're going to go through them one by one. And I will pick up with the first one.
Sure.
And that is if you don't have a recorded score and you've canceled all your prior scores.
You took the easy one.
That's exactly what I did. I was like, I'm going to just cruise tonight. It's not going to be that difficult. You're going to do all the work.
Yeah.
But if you have no prior score and you want to apply this season and you're getting towards the end of the admissions windows, which we'll talk about at the very end, you don't really have a choice. You have to register to take March and give it your best shot. So that's a pretty simple one right there. If you don't have a score and you've canceled everything previously, you're forced to retake it this time around. So let's go on to the second reason, because that one's pretty simple.
Right. And the second one is a little more complicated, or at least a little more involved. I suppose in a word we could call this underperformance, but what we really mean is if the results that you do have on your record at this point you feel don't adequately represent your potential, whether that's in terms of self-estimation or in terms of the actual results you've been getting on practice tests leading up to the real thing. Because to me, both of those matter. The practice test probably being the more objective or hardline measure.
Yeah. If you're under your practice test average and then on your actual LSAT, you know you can do better. I mean, these are real LSATs that you're taking as PTs, or at least they should be, if they are not, change something immediately. So if you are underperforming that on the real test, you know you can do better.
Right. Although let's put a couple finer points on that. One, you want it to be an actually timed test. I know a lot of people out there, and I don't mean to point fingers at anyone, but are guilty of the idea of, well, I would have gotten this right if, on test day, or, well, I ran out of time here, but it's only because I was too slow there and I wouldn't have been. If you're hedging or you're making adjustments after the fact, don't do that. Look at the actual results that you're getting and be honest and accurate with yourself. Secondly, you want to do it off of recent tests. So a lot of people will take tests in the 20s or 30s, 1997, and be like, well, I did well there. And that's great. But those aren't always the most representative samples of what you're going to see now. And Dave and I have spoken at length about the last 2 release tests, September and November of 2018, and just how, I think, unique those tests were in terms of how they demonstrated themselves to be slipperier, more elusive, particularly in logical reasoning. So you want your practice test results to be off of things from relatively recent years, 2015 to the present, I'd say. Roughly.
Yeah. Not to say that the old tests are not worthwhile.
Of course.
We'll talk about it on another day, but I mean, I think that doing every single LSAT is an incredibly valuable exercise,
sure.
Whether it's PT2 or PT22 or 72 or what have you.
But if you're going to use one as a litmus test, 2017 is better than 96.
Why not see what they're doing in the most recent years? That way, at least there's no real surprise that you're running into. And try not to choose a test that's like notoriously difficult either.
Right.
You can get that, but if you're taking the virus game test and you're all of a sudden like, I didn't do that well on it because I got crushed in games, maybe don't use that one.
That's September 2016 for anyone curious.
Yes, it is.
That was
the
a beast.
S16 LSAT, and there's the virus game. Screwing people at the very end.
Indeed. Beastly. Dave, let's talk a little bit about what it means to perform under your average, or even maybe what an average means. So to me, when I look at this, every LSAT comes with an inherent range. Scores in that regard are sort of soft indicators. If you're scoring 155, I'd say 153 to 157 is really what you're talking about. So if you're 1 or 2 below your average, I'd say you still mostly hit your number. What we're talking about, at least what I'm talking about, is 3, 4 plus points below where you have reasonably been performing. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think, the score banding with kind of like the ±3 is a really interesting thing that they're doing to tell people it's a zone. It's a soft zone, which is what you used as a description. I think is perfectly accurate. Yeah. That when you have that, you're going to see score variation. And by the way, you see students before every LSAT who are like, I took a practice test the day before, 2 days before, and I scored 4 points lower. I'm panicking. And I always think 2 things. Don't do that, number 1, meaning don't take that practice test. And number 2, don't panic.
Don't panic, yeah.
The 4 points underneath, that's just mathematical variation that's occurring. You're within standard deviations of your central score, so to speak.
Scores are even reported with that band attached.
Yeah, for this exact reason.
Right.
The thing is that when we talk about it, we use the exact number because it's so much more just precise, obviously, right. But this is so much more comfortable. Hi, I'm a 161 to 167. What? Get out of here, man. What's your real score? So, but when you do talk about that performing under the practice test, think about it. Let's say you've been scoring 167, 168, 169 on a practice test, and you've been doing that consistently. You've done it 3, 4, 5 times in the prior several weeks before the actual LSAT. And then you go out, take the real test, and you get a 160. What does that tell you? Does it tell you that you're a bad test taker? No. It tells you that you had a bad day. And these things actually happen. I mean, this is the way life works. And it sucks that it actually occurs that way. But at the same time, you have to shake it off. You have to look at it and be like, okay, it was a bad day. It's not branded on your forehead. The way admissions works these days is they use the highest score.
Right.
So if you go out and get a higher score next time, it's like that 160 just gets washed away. It's not tattooed on you. It doesn't follow you around in law school.
Scarlet letter of
Yes.
Terrible score.
The easy A.
That's right.
So to speak. So
Story of my college.
yes, it is.
So yeah, you can have a bad day, and it doesn't follow you forever. In fact, it's largely dismissed, invisible once you do better. What are some other factors from what you've seen that would be the kind of, call it trigger, where someone's like, I experienced X, and that makes me think this score is not representative?
Well, I would say there's probably a couple different broad areas of cause for this. Internal and external really is the way I kind of think about test day problems.
Okay.
And I've written articles before about like luck in the LSAT and how just random things.
The LSAT Casino, right? It's one of my favorites. It's great.
That's a different article, actually. That is luck in terms of the test that they give you.
The content. I see.
Yeah, the way the test itself can affect you. And that's a really good point, too, because if you are really good at an idea like conditional reasoning and you get a test that has a lot of conditional reasoning, well, lucky day for you.
Right.
It's like you walked into the LSAT casino, you rolled, and man, you came up a winner. But if you're great at something like conditional reasoning and then they just withdraw it from that test and they don't give you a whole lot of it, well, sorry, you're screwed, buddy. You walk out with no money.
I'll give you one of my favorite examples of this. It was the 2017, the 3 release tests, and the strengthen question content. Strengthen is a hit or miss question for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And depending on when you took it, you either had 3 strengthen, 6 strengthen, or 9 strengthen questions. That is a massive variation on a singular idea, and that's, in a way,
3
make
versus
or break.
9
3
right
versus
there.
9, yeah.
But John, it all averages out to 6, so we're good, right?
LSAT math.
Yeah, but the LSAT casino concept is really built around what the test makers give you. The article about luck in the LSAT really talks about all the things that can happen to you from the nature of your test center and things like that. Really, what I would call external factors. And so, let's start with the external factor kind of breakdown, because I think that's really one of the more interesting parts. But the external factors that can affect your practice or your actual LSAT performance are really the kinds of things that you hear about and people are like, they're not external factors, they're horror stories where a marching band goes right outside the test center and plays right before the big game on Saturday.
Are you thinking of our UCLA students like a couple years ago?
That's happened there. I believe it's also happened at Berkeley and a couple other colleges. Mm-hmm. Power outages. I've seen that at numerous centers where all of a sudden you're in the middle of the test, power goes out.
Happened in New York a couple years back.
Yeah. And if you think about that, it sounds like, well, no big deal. They've got the light from outside. Not if you're in one of those big auditoriums. They usually don't have a whole lot of light inside.
And power means heat or AC, depending on your time of year. The power outage in New York, I'm thinking of, happened on the February test a couple of years back. And they just sit there watching their own breath for about 20 minutes in the dark.
Great. Love that. That's why you should wear layers. Because they meant ski parkas.
Yeah, it wasn't layers. You need an igloo.
Get ready to go to Colorado for skiing. But if you think about that kind of disaster, that has such a huge impact. And, last week we mentioned the Proctors screw-ups down in Florida, which are really just so common. It's almost not, talking about them is just like the same old thing. It's old hat. Another one that comes up a lot is fire alarm problems and issues with that. And we actually had a student post on the forum that took an accommodated LSAT. And I'll read from the post that they made about what happened. And it says, about 3 minutes into section 5, a light started flashing and an emergency alarm went off. Okay, so immediately you're like, this is not cool. The alarm continued for about 30 seconds until our proctor had to stop the clock. Had to stop the clock. They didn't really have to, they just chose to. And leave the room to see what was going on. And this is actually where the scary part comes in, especially these days. He was afraid it was a fire, which would be bad, or an active shooter, which would, be probably worse in some ways. So while my proctor went to check, the other testing rooms started to evacuate. So they could hear them around leaving. After a bit, the proctor came back in the room and told us to wait for an update. Oh, that makes me feel so much better. Finally, we got the okay from the director, which is a very big brother kind of thing. The director gave us an okay. Conveyed that to everybody. Everything was fine. We're good. So we start the clock again. But now we're interrupted for a second time. This time a voice, more Big Brotherisms, came over the speakers to tell us that everything was fine. Sounds terrible, like an invasion. 3 times we were told that. However, this time the proctor did not stop the clock, and by this time all of us were confused and distracted, and it was just not good. And I like that description there because I think it's so understating it. It's just not good. No, this is bad news. I could not focus, and I did not finish the section, which was logic games. And you think about that, section 5, especially if this test had been going well for this person, this is what they get hit with at the end. And there's no way they could have expected this. And it's exactly the kind of thing where if that's what occurred and it affected your score, you have to immediately think about retaking it, especially when we talk about the relationship between LSAT scores and financial aid offers, let alone LSAT scores and getting into law school in the first place. It has such a big impact that if you have these external factors that we're talking about, these disasters, you have to really say to yourself, I'm going to retake it. It's just so much worth the money and the time invested to go ahead and do that. So
I look at that as a fluke. That's the kind of thing you can't anticipate, you can't prepare for, you can't see coming. And if it happens, well, I mean, what do you do aside from react?
Yeah, even if you expect it, you still can't control the situation.
Right.
A bad proctor or a fire alarm or a marching band or what have you, it's out of your control. You hope the proctor reacts well, but in my experience, the average proctor is not there because they have a deep love of the LSAT and wanting to help students do well on the test. They're there because LSAT's paying them to be there. Yeah. And they just want to leave quickly after they finish chewing their gum or loudly drinking.
Cash their check on a Saturday.
That's all Coke it is,
for sure. Happily, 2 things, as I would put it. One, the proctor situation is about to resolve itself, as anyone who's eyeing the digital test later this year knows.
Yes.
So that's good news. Proctors won't be allowed to screw up your test day anymore because the test will self-proctor, starting full-scale September. 2, I actually do think, and I'm sure you talk to students about this a lot, it's worthwhile to almost envision or prepare yourself for exactly these moments. What are you going to do if you get the worst possible section order? If there is a fire alarm, if the power goes out, if there's a marching band, how are you going to react to symbols outside your window? That kind of thing. And I talk to students a lot about this, about the Freddie Mercury fortitude of how to survive these moments, or at least, live through them. If you can't thrive in the face of the Bruins marching band, how are you going to at least get by?
Prevail. Yeah.
But at the same time, this is the sort of thing externally that can disrupt your day to the point where a retake becomes almost an inevitability.
Exactly. And internal factors can hit you with that.
And they do.
We talked about there not being a good test for you personally, but at the same time, what if you wake up and you're sick?
Yeah.
And something, happens. I had a student who was during the middle of the test whose nose started bleeding profusely. Jesus. And he didn't realize what was happening until he saw these drops of blood on the page. And it was like, well, what's going on? And then somebody immediately is like, dude, your face is bleeding. And so, you have to go to the bathroom. You got to fix that. It's a weird thing anyway. And then you're coming back. Yeah, it's a jarring experience. It's going to have a negative effect.
Or what if you're the person sitting next to the guy with the nosebleed?
Yes. Or you're the person sitting next to the person who likes to tap their foot or tap their pencil or has the sniffles.
I'm guilty of the tapping, not the sniffles.
And, tapping's cool with me. But it's like keep that stuff to yourself during the test is the way I would actually look at it.
But internally, what if something goes wrong with you? What if you just hit a moment? And everyone, the best test takers in the world have had this. You hit a moment where you're just confused. You're stumped, flummoxed. You don't know what to do next. That virus game that you mentioned before had me in something of a pickle for a good, 3 or 4 seconds. Which is deeply
3 or 4 seconds. Man, that was deep confusion.
It was an eternity, David.
Yes. Was that the longest you've ever been confused in your life?
About anything.
Oh, I could just shred you, but I'm just going to leave that alone.
Thank you.
I've seen you more confused than that for longer. I guarantee.
Oh, there's 1,000 bad jokes running through my head that I'm going to leave.
Amsterdam on New Year's, where you didn't even know where you were.
I was going to make pregnancy test jokes, and you're going to Amsterdam. All right. For you
That's
listeners
not
out there.
confusion, that's terror. There's a totally different idea behind those two right there.
And thus ends our podcast.
Yeah. It was good.
That
Thanks.
was a good run. 1.5.
Well, let's move on. We've got two of the big reasons that you would retake. You don't have a prior score, or you've really performed quite obviously under your potential. Let's move to I think, a really more interesting thing to talk about, and that is whether or not getting a higher score can increase your chances of admission.
Yeah, an actual tangible motivator, as I see it.
Yeah. Now, let's say you've already got a score. And you're sitting out there and let's say you've posted like a 162, but the school you're looking at has a median that's 166 or 167. But you're thinking, I've got a 398 and a host of really good extracurriculars. What should I do? Well, the answer is quite easily go retake the test. It's not just that the LSAT is the biggest piece of your admissions file. It's that schools are going to look at that kind of scenario and think to themselves, gosh, we'd love to take this person, except the LSAT score is going to drag our average down, and that's going to be a problem for our U.S. News ranking. And, of course, we worship the gods at U.S. News and their ranking system. At least law school people do, or are forced to by financial truth. So, or another thing is, let's say you're just 1 or 2 points below the median. In a lot of cases, you find that students will say, I'm so close, I'm at the 25th or I'm above it. I'm just going to wing it. I'm going to do it. And we did a seminar with the Spivey Consulting Group this past fall. And Derek Meeker, who used to be the admissions director at the University of Pennsylvania, made a really interesting comment about this during that seminar. And we'll link the seminar in the podcast notes. And what he said was this. He's like, the median is really critical when you are looking at admitting people. And he was quite clear. He's like, if you're just 1 point below the median, I would love to see you retake and get to the median at least. I'm not saying that you have to blow the doors off and go way over the 75th, but when we are looking at applicants, hitting that median is a really important thing, because as admissions directors, we know that we have to shape a certain profile of class. And if we keep taking people that are below these numbers, it's going to drag us down, and we really cannot afford to have that happen.
Yeah, but to really emphasize that, I mean, think about this. 1 point below the median was enough for a guy at the highest levels to encourage people to retake. That's remarkable, and I think poignant, salient to this.
And it didn't surprise me, but I was like, the force of what he said, the conviction behind it was like, wow. He was like, no, there's no doubt.
No,
not like, it's pretty good. It was you and I were both in that seminar with them talking about it, and he was adamant about.
I cocked my head when I heard him say that. I said, really?
Yeah.
That even 1 point would motivate the retry. It's crazy.
Especially because when you think about how much work it is from a student perspective, it's like 1 point makes that much of a difference. Depending where the point is,
right.
That's exactly the case. Especially around those medians, it becomes really critical for them. So from an admission standpoint, having a higher LSAT score has a really big impact in terms of what can happen, what the schools will actually do.
Right. Look, if you're 10 points below the median, 1 point improvement, you're probably still in the same boat. But if you're really close, that 1 point can actually be the make or break difference.
That's exactly the case. Now, that brings up an interesting scenario, which is what happens if you already have a score on file? That's pretty good. Maybe you've got that 161, 162, but you're looking at a school that has a higher median than that, and you're about to retake this LSAT, but they haven't rendered a decision yet.
Right.
This is one of the most common questions that you actually see on forums that we get asked about it. What do you do at that point?
Well, it's a good question. One of the things I think a lot of people don't realize is that schools can see the behind the scenes on a lot of this stuff. Schools know what you're registered for. Schools know when a new piece of data is going to come in for you, when your credentials are going to update. If you're signed up right now for the March test, the schools to which you have applied, who might even be waiting for January scores, will also know that a March score is theoretically coming.
Yeah. They don't know that you're going to get a score or not cancel or
they don't know what you'll do, but they can at least see your plans.
Yeah. So, and schools have different policies. Most of them will say, we'll wait. And so they'll put your application in kind of like a hold status.
It's limbo.
And
Yeah.
wait to see what will happen. But I always tell students the same thing, which is this. If you have a score that you don't think is quite good enough, write to school and say, hey, I'm taking the LSAT again. I'm hoping to improve my chances by increasing my score.
Yeah.
And if you can wait to consider my application, that would be good.
Yeah. Give schools a reason to keep you on the table.
Yeah. And most schools will actually honor that particular commitment. I think, when you get into the very top level schools, they're kind of like, sorry, we're just doing our thing.
When you say very top level, see if you can you put a more definitive point on it?
Harvard, Yale, Stanford.
Top 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
I always feel that those 3 schools are kind of like, we do what we want. They're like the mean girls of the law school group. They run around and they're like, we don't care. We're better than everybody else. So, and at least reputationally speaking, they have that advantage. So that gives them a lot of latitude.
I hate to say they've earned it, but
well, maybe they have.
Maybe.
That's a question for a different day.
It's a whole different discussion. However, at the vast majority of schools, if you give them indication that there's good reason to wait for you, to keep an eye on you, they'll do it.
Yeah. And if you don't tell them, then what you're really saying to the school is, I'm leaving it up to you. They can either decide to wait for the new score to come out, or some schools will actually just render a decision at that particular point in time. So I always think, why leave it in their hands? Why not tell them what it is that you'd like to see happen?
Yeah.
And if you have a score that is good enough for the school, you can write them and say, hey, I'm okay with you going ahead and considering me with this. Right. The score on record. I am retaking it. Hopefully, if I do better, I can maybe get a better financial offer, but you can go ahead and render a decision given what my situation is.
But if you find yourself into one of the categories we've already discussed, you've had some issue on test day, or you've underperformed, or very briefly, you don't have a score yet, then all the more reason for you to encourage these schools to just keep you as a contender and wait.
Yeah. And if they haven't done anything yet, it's telling you that there wasn't an instantaneous decision.
Right.
They didn't love you or hate you. And so
it's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. It means you're still in the running. The race is ongoing. If you can do something to enhance your position and status at that point, why not do it? It's like performance enhancing drugs for law school, admissions and applications. Not that I know anything about that.
No, look, if you could deflate a football.
Don't be shading Tom Brady.
I'm trying to make it all relevant.
I will not accept a Tom Brady shade.
All right.
You're talking about the greatest of all time. Okay. And the NFL, by the way, is completely corrupt.
With softballs.
And Goodell was after him. That's all I have to say about these topics.
All right.
God, I sound like a New England homer.
Just trying to get you riled up.
Yeah, well, it worked, right?
I did, apparently. However, yes, if you have any reason to believe that your next attempt is going to be better, then give schools a reason to believe that as well.
All right, let's move on to, I think, the next really good reason to retake, and that is if you have been stuck on the wait list and you're just sitting there hanging out, and now you got literally months of waiting to see. And I'm assuming that you haven't gotten into a school that you like better already. If that's been the case, that's a different consideration. But let's say you're you've been waitlisted at a school that you really like and you wish that you'd gotten in. This was your number one choice. This is a great time to retake the test. And last year, again, we talked to Mike Spivey about this, and we were talking to him in context of the June LSAT. Mm-hmm. And we were using the idea of, well, can you take the June LSAT and use it to get in off the wait list? And his answer was a very definitive yes. He's like, happens all the time. Mm-hmm. These later scores after you have applied, they aren't ignored. And let's say you had applied to a school that was, let's say, the Harvard, Stanford, Yale kind of triumvirate, and they waitlisted you and you were floating around out there. For sure, even they will take a look at an LSAT score that comes in later that's higher. Mm-hmm. You're changing your status.
And theirs. Same thing
and theirs. They love to see that. Oh, you were a 168 before, and now you've gotten a 173. That does actually change where you sit in our pool. The same thing, by the way, would be true if you did some great thing at work. Like you had some, amazing promotion, or you gave like a landmark speech or authored some kind of paper that
Nobel Prize comes in
Yeah, if you want to get a better profile, it doesn't have to just be your LSAT. It can be anything else that's out there. So it really is a matter of how you look at it. But if you think about that for a second, we were talking about the June LSAT in that conversation, and his comment was, for sure, the June LSAT can be used to get people in off the wait list. Well, right now, we're still in February. We have a March and June LSAT. Yeah. Either one of those can be used for this particular purpose. So I think that's a big positive right there is the waitlist aspect. But to me, that isn't even, I think, the biggest reason to go out and do, kind of retake the LSAT here.
No, I know exactly where you're going to go with this. It's where my heart lives too, which is money.
You love the money.
How'd I do? Did I get it?
I think, now I'm starting to think, I wish we could play theme songs right here because I would hit Pink Floyd's Money.
I'd be okay with that.
Play that underneath us for a little bit here.
That's
really
jam.
What it's all about.
Yeah. Oh, let's be honest. I mean, this is in large part a negotiation game. And a big reason to try to improve your own profile, your credentials, is so that schools won't make you pay as much or will even pay you.
So what do you think happens? You go out and you get a higher score. What's the reaction of the school? Let's say I've been floating along at 162, and that's what I applied with. And then I go take March, and I get a 165. What's the reaction of the school to that?
I mean, the easiest, shortest answer is positive. But what it gives you, essentially, I think, is a power to then control your own destiny, to make the school desire you more. That's all this is, man. It's a teeter-totter. It's leverage. Who's more desirable? You for the school or the school for you? Because that's where the money lives, right? If you want the school more than they need you, you have to pay for that privilege. I hate to be so mercenary about it.
That's what it is. This is an economics game, ultimately.
It's simple math.
And if the school needs you
more than yeah, exactly. The school needs you more than you need them because you're going to bring up their averages, their credentials. You're going to be a pin in their cap, a shining star, a feather in the hat. They'll charge you less or charge you nothing.
I like to say they'll give you more. But it really,
they'll take less, they'll give you more.
Yeah, it all shakes out in the exact same way. But that is indeed the case, is that you can use that higher score to negotiate or renegotiate for a better financial package. And this is interesting because this is something that has really risen since the economic crash. Prior to the economic crash, this was a little bit less common. In fact, you'd hear people say, "You mean I can negotiate? I thought I just had to accept what they offered me." Even if nothing changes in your profile, you can always negotiate or at least attempt to negotiate. The difference is that if your numbers are better or you're in a stronger position, your ability to negotiate is improved.
Yep.
So going back to the example of somebody who was at a 162 and then went to 165, for some schools, the Stanfords of the world, their reaction wouldn't be a whole lot. They'd be like, unfortunately, we really like to see better numbers still. Right. And I'm sure if a Stanford rep was here, they'd be like, we're not that crass. And of course, my response would be, really?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I don't know. I've looked at your numbers. Gosh, they seem consistent. They're higher than that, huh? Every year. So there is that. But for a lot of schools, they would see that as a significant move, and a lot of great schools too. Yeah. So they would probably come back and say, all right, maybe we offered you this previously, and now we're going to give you, we're going to increase that by 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever the amount may be. I saw that last admission season happen repeatedly.
Me too. Dozens of my own students.
Yeah,
in fact.
People came back with later scores and were able to use that all the way into the summer to kind of make decisions on this, because you're not really locked in until quite late. Yeah, you may lose a deposit at a school, but double depositing these days, I'm telling you, I don't have a problem with it because it's all about what's best for you.
Absolutely. Dropping the bucket in the big picture too. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, if you have to drop a deposit amount, big deal. If you can get tons more money from a different school that you actually desire more and think will give you better job outcomes there. To
be clear, a lot of this, though, is built around the school's inherent metrics. So those medians that we've been discussing. Look, if you go from 138 to 148, Harvard's still off the table. Mm-hmm. I mean, unless you're just someone so remarkable that LSAT scores don't matter anymore. But that 10-point jump doesn't mean much. But to go from a 162 to 164 at a place where a 162 is the median, not only does that make you more competitive, it completely changes the landscape. It changes who you are as an applicant. It changes how the school sees you. So this is a big impactor, I think, for what it would mean to retake the test, is where am I in terms of where I want to be? Do I have good reason to believe, which is what we started this talking about, that I could be someplace better? And if I was someplace better, what are the benefits, financial, etc., for me? And that, to me, is how all of this coalesces into a decision.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a perfect summary right there. I'm not even going to add to it. It was that good.
Thank you.
So let's move on. So no, we've talked about the 5 reasons why you would retake. Why wouldn't you retake? What are the cons?
Well, happily, there's not a whole lot of them here. I mean, it's not an empty bucket, but there's not many cons. The most obvious, I think, and a lot of people hearing this right now are probably groaning in some deep part of their soul about just, God, do I have it in me to sit down and go through this again? Do I want to spend the money? Do I want to spend the time? It's
battle
brutal.
Fatigue.
Battle fatigue is a good way to say it. Yeah, I mean, it never stops being uphill. But as we've just discussed, not to put every one of these cons with a bit of hyperbole on the end and some flip back. Yes, that's a negative, but the truth is the amount of time and effort and money you could put in could save you so much in terms of opportunity later on. What kind of con is it really? It's the con of hard work, which is just life in a nutshell.
Yeah, and guess what? When you get to law school, you better be prepared to work hard.
Yeah. So what's the con of writing that paper, taking that test, reading this summary?
But if you think about it too, if you've already studied for the test once or more than once, you have a scenario where you've already staged up. You're not at ground zero. Studying for the LSAT from ground zero can be really daunting. You don't know the terminology, the questions are hard. But if you've already gone through this for a while, your biggest problem is usually your own mentality towards the test. You just don't want to do it. You're sick of it. You hate the LSAT, and it's boring to you at this point. You've got to get past that, though, because it's like a rocket. You've already dropped the first 2 stages. You just need to keep going. You don't just cut the mission short and explode the rocket at that point. You want to keep on going and get into outer space ultimately.
Yeah,
so
that's such a good point.
You know, you see it all the time because it's more like that resignation, like, oh, I can't believe I have to do this again.
Yeah, but everybody looks at it from this perspective of starting over. It's not at all. It's mostly maintenance, some fine-tuning, and again, if you suffered some unfortunate fate on test day, just a bit of good luck.
Yeah. Having everything kind of come together, at least reasonably. It doesn't have to come together perfectly. Right. It never will come together perfectly. That just doesn't really happen. You always have to expect some kind of negativity. It is an interesting question, though, in the midst of this. What do you think the maximum number of retakes is that someone can legitimately have before they start to look like they're completely nuts?
Well, let me answer this in 2 parts, which is the first, legal, I suppose. Like, what is LSAC actually allowed now? Because forever, you could only take the test 3 times in 2 years. And of course, that naturally capped people without getting school permissions and various sort of
it was a stupid rule that I'm really glad they dropped.
Runarounds and things. But they've dropped all that. So now you can actually take the test as many times. I know this isn't your question, but I'll mention it. As many times as you want. As many years as you want. So you could be an absolute maniac about this. And between now and, say, the end of next year, you could take the test, 15 times or something?
You can take it too many times to count.
That is
honestly.
too many, but it is allowed. So the second part of this answer is really, go ahead.
Yeah, and before we get to that second part, think about this. The other thing that they changed, which was really critical, was they stopped averaging scores at the law school level. So those 2 things, the dropping of the average score and the ability to take it more than 3 times in 2 years, has opened up a completely new world that we're just starting to see now. And so with that, I mean, it's a huge thing because the law schools don't care about your average anymore. Right. So if you take it 5 times, they're not looking at average. They're looking solely at the high score. And this is like one of those things you see on Twitter. Don't at me, because you see some schools still are like, we look at all the scores. Yeah, they don't.
Yeah,
all right?
there's a lot of old language still out there.
Yeah.
This is a perfect time to bring this up too, under the cons section, because this to me is perhaps the greatest single myth that exists about retakes.
Yep. And it's an artifact. It's a holdover from this past era. And I've talked to a lot of admissions professionals about this, a lot of law school consultants about it. And it's really interesting because it frustrates a lot of them, especially from the consultant standpoint, because they know how it works. And many of them have worked before in admissions offices. And they're like, yeah, we don't like to say it, but this is the reality. We look at the high score.
It penalizes them too, if you think about it. Imagine there's a guy out there who could get a 4-point higher score and apply to their school and thinks that it won't matter, that it'll be averaged down. Schools would rather that guy go take it again.
Yes, but schools don't always do what is really in their best interest.
I know, they're not as transparent as they should be, which is why we're here.
Yeah, they do so much based upon the image, and that's also a discussion for another day.
Indeed it is. But I can tell you, and Dave, I know we've just said it, this is not a test that's going to penalize you for having multiple scores on your report. It's not a test that's going to penalize you if your score goes down, which we'll talk about in a second. This is merely a result of what the highest number you can put on your portfolio is.
So exactly how many retakes do you think is like the maximum number that is really, I'll call it socially acceptable from a law school application
socially
standpoint?
Acceptable. 6. That's my number.
I agree with you. Just because anything more than 6 starts to feel like obsession without reward. Like you're just doing the same thing over and over again.
Perhaps.
Yeah, that's a harsher way of putting it.
Yeah, you know me.
But there's that old saying, if you keep doing the same thing over and over.
Definition of insanity.
Yeah, and expecting a different result, you're crazy.
So the key to a retake, which we'll talk about next week, is doing things differently.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
excited to have that conversation next week, by the way.
Me too.
I'm really looking forward to that because I want to get down into some of the mechanics of it. And I think you'll see as we move forward in the podcast, we're going to get down into some of the mechanics of not just studying, but questions and so forth.
Yeah, we're going to get narrow. But while we continue to talk about cons, I do want to talk a little bit about the idea of averaging. I don't think we can put too strict a point to this. Schools do not do this. But, and I'm going to throw an asterisk on here that you may try to erase. We'll see what happens. Okay. Some schools in Canada apparently do still do this. So I don't want to put some like worldwide blanket on this. There are schools internationally where you could potentially be an average.
Yeah, you make an excellent point, and I will not erase that asterisk.
I'm not done with it.
I will leave it there.
Okay.
Canada, that friendly country to the north.
Good old Canada.
Some of the schools do things differently there. And so if you were applying to schools in Canada, you definitely want to make sure you know what their policies.
Do your research.
Yeah. In the domestic U.S. Law school situation, it's not an average. They use just the high score. So sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. Secondly, while a lot of schools out there would talk about, we view the holistic nature of your application, what I think they really mean by this, if that language still holds at all, is that they're looking for trends and anything that could potentially be a worrisome type of behavioral situation. So let's say you've taken the test, what we'd call maybe an upper limit number of 6 times, and you've got a 141 and a 145 and a 168 and a 152 and a 143 and a 150. Or you've got 5 cancellations of those 6.
Wait a second, in that order?
Yeah, chronologically.
What drugs have you been taking before the test?
There are questions that would naturally arise. At that point, you're still your highest score, but you got some explaining to do.
Yeah, then you should be writing an addendum about this.
That's right. So it's not just free reign.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. It's interesting because there was a story that was told about, this was from several years ago, about a student who took it 6 times. And their first 5 takes were really, I guess, not that impressive or not good enough. And it was their 6th and final take that ended up getting them into 2 top 6 law schools.
Wow.
And even at that, this was several years ago, and people were like, 6 times is completely insane.
Mm-hmm. Well, then it had to take at least 4 years for them to even get.
Yep. Took them a long time to kind of get through that. And of course, scores only were on your record for 5 years. Right. So to have that many scores on there, that meant they had to keep taking it as soon as it opened up. But I think most people aren't in a situation where they're going towards 6. I don't think it's normal. I don't think it's commonplace. So if you're out there, though, and you're like, I've already taken it twice, Is 3 too many times? The answer is definitely not. It's definitely not. I can point to numerous people who have taken the LSAT 3 and 4 times and gotten into top law schools.
Absolutely.
And I know enough examples of 5 times to feel like it's not a big deal either. And I know of stories where people with 6 scores have gotten in.
Yeah.
I don't know too many people that have taken the LSAT like 7 or more times and applied to law school. So that's kind of, to me, where the cutoff is.
I feel like that's more historical context, though, that you just until recently couldn't.
Totally. I can't get away from my history of this.
Well,
and
that's all we're allowed to talk about.
yeah, I keep an open mind, though, because really, from a logical standpoint, should the law schools care if you took it 12 times? No. What's the big difference to them? They report the highest score to the ABA, which, is what gets reported to U.S. News. So who cares? I know law school people, though, they live in the past. And sometimes when I hear them talk about the LSAT or taking it a lot, their attitudes towards it are so old school. I just kind of want to be like,
Yeah. Get with the times, man.
Yeah. If you can go out and get a certain score, let's say a 165 or a 170, to me, you are that score.
Yeah.
I don't care if you have lower scores on your record. You showed the ability to reach that particular point. I'm good enough with it. Which also brings up a secondary thing, because one of the big fears that people have is, I have a pretty good score. I'm sitting right near where I need to be. What if I go out and I have a disastrous result? Is that just going to screw me over?
Well, the beauty of this is we kind of touched on it a couple of times already, which is merely the fact that it no longer matters. Now, again, if you present some sort of track record, some behavioral inconsistencies that require explanation, that's different. But if you go 165, 152, 168, you're at 168.
Yep.
And despite the fact that I know it's terrifying to consider, schools will only treat you as a high score.
Yeah. And if you go 168 and then the next score is 160, they just go back to the 168.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Yeah.
So, obviously that's a point that, is personal for each individual that's out there, but don't worry about it. Think high score is what matters. High score is my focus. If I'm going to retake this, I've just got to focus on that particular idea.
Yeah. And if you know you have the potential for more, there is almost zero downside to another attempt, aside from what we talked about, which is just the mental and financial costs.
The loss of time, and, personal time, and just the fatigue of doing it.
Sure.
There is one other con I can think of.
And I know you're going to talk about admissions and rolling admissions, right?
No, I'm not going to talk about rolling admissions.
Oh, okay.
Why would you mention that?
I don't know. Crazy.
I might talk about it.
I'm going to talk about it then.
All right, I'll talk about it.
You go.
So the biggest con maybe is the fact that it pushes your applications back.
Right.
So if you have taken the January LSAT and now you're like, I'm going to take that March LSAT, and you write to a law school and you say, can you hold my application? What you're really saying is, from a rolling admission standpoint, I want you to wait about 2 more months to actually take a look at my results and my entire admissions folder.
While you're looking at other applicants in the meantime, yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of get pushed back in line. Now, as far as admissions chances, my view is singular on this. If you present the best numbers, it doesn't matter when you apply.
Yep.
I don't care if you apply in June, you're going to get in. So if you have outstanding numbers and you get that retake and it just kind of comes together for you, they're going to come back to you and be like, we do want you here, and that's good enough, and accept you. So from that standpoint, I don't have any reservations. Right. The one concern, and you're seeing it a lot this year in particular, is, will there be money? You may have fantastic numbers, but will there be enough money remaining that, from a financial aid standpoint and from a financial offer standpoint, so that you can actually still go to the school and have it make economic sense?
Right.
And my take is actually kind of more towards the first part, which is, again, if you're a really good applicant, they will find money for you. They don't give it all away by January 1st and everyone else just gets nothing. They do dole it out, and segment it, and they watch their percentages very carefully. But there will be money. Maybe less overall. Maybe they're slightly less generous, but maybe you wouldn't have gotten in otherwise.
Yeah.
Or maybe they wouldn't have made any offer to you previously.
Yeah, there's a finite amount, but you make yourself so desirable that a school just cannot say no. And they'll do whatever it takes to get you there.
Yeah. And at worst, you're left with different offers from schools, and then you get to juggle what it is that you want to do.
And play them against each other, which is one of my favorite parts in the negotiation process.
Yes. And it probably later on in the stream, we'll talk about the balancing of like scholarships versus prestige and paying full ride and what should you do in terms of that. But that's where that decision comes in. The better numbers that you have, the better your position is going to be in the pool. That's going to give you more admits. It's going to overall give you more money, even though it might take some more time and effort on your part, and it may push you back in the pool a little bit.
It is worth it.
So
it is so worth it. The big question that remains is, how do you guarantee that it's worth it? How do you guarantee that your next attempt is going to be the one that really sets you up for success?
Well, I guess we'll have to wait a week to talk about that one. So that'll be our topic next week. And we just want to go ahead and say thanks so much for listening tonight. On my behalf, I really appreciate it, Jon.
Yeah, man. It's always fun. I'll talk to you next week. Continue this.
Yes, indeed. And if you get a chance, go ahead and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and YouTube, Spotify, what have you. If you can, give us a rating. We'd really appreciate that. And until next time, have a great week.
Thanks, guys.